Hi, I'm Phil, and in these story analysis videos, we take a look at a film in terms of its story structure, character arcs and themes from the point of view of a screenwriter and filmmaker. Today, we're looking at Jaws. Make sure you've seen the film, spoilers ahead. Jaws was released in 1975, directed by Steven Spielberg, his second movie, third if you count Duel, which was made for TV originally. It was written by Peter Benchley, who wrote the original novel, and Carl Gottlieb, who also acted in the film.
It's not just the Gazette, she's advertising an out-of-town paper.
Although there are other writers involved, and we'll come to that. Now, because this came from a novel, it doesn't necessarily follow a three-act structure. And also because, kind of famously, they were making the film up as they went along. This didn't really have a script when they started production. Or it did have a script, but it's not the script they ended up shooting. They were changing it as they went.
They started the shoot without a cast, without a script, and without a shark.
On days when I wasn't needed as an actor, and write and try to finish the script. And it changed considerably from the script that even Steven had started with.
So our inciting incident, this is fairly obvious, of course. This is the first death of the girl in the water. That then introduces our central character of Brody, the sheriff, who is investigating this.
Nobody saw her go into the water?
Somebody could have. I was sort of passed out.
And the central conflict for the first half of the film, which is between not him and the shark, it's between Brody and the mayor.
You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
One of the things this film does quite effectively is we have an A-plot. It's a horror film, it's a thriller, and the A-plot is simply humans versus shark, Brody in particular. But there is a whole B-plot level conflict also going on. This is the conflict between Brody and the mayor. The mayor is our real antagonist, even after the second attack.
Are you going to close the beaches?
Yes, we are.
Only 24 hours.
I didn't agree to that.
Only 24 hours.
Roy Scheider's Brody is our central character. At the beginning, he's shown to be a very competent sheriff.
Get out of there. Take the stuff back to the office and get to work on those signs. Beaches closed. No swimming. By order of the Amity PD.
He's come from New York, and he and his family have moved here, presumably to get away from the high-stress job that he had in New York.
They're in the yard, not too far from the car. How's that?
Like you're from New York.
This will be an easy gig. Unfortunately, he's afraid of water.
We know all about you, Chief. You don't go in the water at all, do you?
Some bad hat, Harry.
Martin hates boats. Martin hates water. Martin sits in his car when we go on the ferry to the mainland. I guess it's a childhood thing. There's a clinical name for it, isn't there?
Drowning.
So at the most basic level, the key thing that we're trying to teach Brody is to not be afraid of the water. Now that's an underlying theme in the film. When it comes down to it, that's the growth arc for Brody. At the very beginning, he's afraid of water, despite his choice to move here with his family. And at the very end, he's okay with it.
I used to hate the water. I can't imagine why.
That's essentially his growth arc. The other key theme here is Brody's inability to stand up for himself against authority figures.
For Christ's sake, tomorrow's the 4th of July, and we will be open for business. It's going to be one of the best summers we've ever had. Now, if you fellas are concerned about the beaches, you do whatever you have to make them safe. But those beaches will be open for this weekend.
He's in charge until he's confronted by the mayor, who's technically his superior. But Brody, as police chief, should have authority in this situation, and he gives it up, essentially. He buckles. This is the other lesson he needs to learn.
Then why don't we have one more drink and go down and cut that shark open?
Martin? Can you do that?
I can do anything. I'm the chief of police.
After the second attack, and the boy is killed, there's a key critical moment here. And again, this is something that most horror films don't do, which is when Brody is confronted by the boy's mother. Here we see the human tragedy and consequences of these deaths.
You knew all those things. But still, my boy is dead now.
This triggers Brody, with Hooper, to cut open the shark, to go against the wishes of the mayor. So this becomes one of Brody's first big tests.
Gotta close the beach, call the mayor.
Got a bigger problem than that, Martin. You still got a hell of a fish out there with a mouth about this big.
Even after that, the beaches remain open. So he hasn't fully passed the test yet of standing up for himself when it comes down to it. If we look at this as a three-act structure, the midpoint, the middle of the film anyway, is when there's the third attack. This is when Brody's own son is in the lagoon to keep them safe. And the attack happens in the lagoon. Fortunately, it's not the son and his friends, but there's someone else in the lagoon that the shark attacks. This becomes our shit gets real moment because this really brings it home to him. This was his own son. And also to the mayor.
My kids were on that beach too.
So now the mayor finally gets it. This is where the main conflict between Brody and the mayor basically comes to a resolution.
Sign it, Larry.
The mayor has given up on his ambitions to keep the place open for tourist season. He doesn't say this out loud, but he gives into the fact that Brody was right. Now, a quick aside, I'm in Australia. I grew up on the Gold Coast, on the border of New South Wales and Queensland, which is very similar to Amity, the town shown in this film. It's a tourist resort. It's famous for its beaches. And in fact, Ron and Valerie Taylor, who famously shot the underwater footage for this film, and they were shark and underwater documentarians. And there's a place on the Gold Coast called SeaWorld, and they would have an exhibit and show videos from Ron and Valerie Taylor. So they were part of the making of this film. But in terms of how the town, the city operates, it relies on tourist dollars.
I'm only trying to say that Amity is a summer town. We need summer dollars.
So you can kind of understand where the mayor is coming from. Both he and Brody, this is the spine of the film, for the first half of the film anyway, really. The spine of the film is what's right for the community, what's best for the community of Amity. From Brody's point of view, let's make sure people don't get eaten by sharks, right? From the mayor's point of view, we rely on the tourist dollar, and this is our summer. We need this season. Our businesses rely on it for the whole year.
I was acting in the town's best interest.
That's right, you were acting in the town's best interest.
So he's also protecting the community in his own way, trying to ignore the real problem. But their motives are the same. Brody is less concerned about the financial stability of the community, arguably, because he has a greater concern that people are getting killed. And one thing we have here in what is essentially a monster movie, after all, there's only 3 real deaths until the very end. So there's only 3 real victims. Every one of those deaths matters. Every one of those people, even though we don't know them closely as characters, were shown to be human beings. And people, especially with the mother coming to slap Brody about her son, that was a real loss. Unlike a lot of war movies, action films, or high-concept horror movies, where the victims don't really matter. It's just the last girl that matters when it comes down to it. So structurally, at that point, they finally bring in Quint, who was introduced at the beginning of the film, but he's really not part of the first half of the film at all.
I value my neck a lot more than $3,000, Chief. I'll find him for 3, but I'll catch him and kill him for 10.
The second half of the film is The Hunt. And that's basically broken into 2 parts as well, where the humans are hunting the shark.
Hey! I got it! What? Get behind me!
And then at what you might call the second act turning point moment, the all is lost moment, the shark starts to fight back and hunt them. And and now they're on the defensive.
He's chasing us. I don't believe it.
Usually in a monster movie, the monster is attacking people and it's all about us defending ourselves, finding a way to solve it, finding a way to overcome the monster and defeat it in the end. Again, they're great monster movies like this. Alien, especially, is another great example of a monster that has no desire apart from eating people, killing people, whatever its underlying primal motive is, right? But it's not a character as such. It's not a character we should care for. It is something to be killed. One of the interesting things here, of course, is that the shark initially is like that. It's just a man-eating beast. And unfortunately, that's what most of the takeaway from this film was, and why there was a lot of slaughter of sharks after this film. But even within the film, they do call this particular shark, this oversized shark, a rogue. And it does have a level of intelligence. Quint, in particular, points this out.
He's gone under. He's gone under the boat. I think he's gone under the boat. Yeah, it's too easy. He ain't a smart, big fish. He's gone under the boat.
In the first half, the real conflict becomes between Brody and the mayor, and that's resolved by the midpoint. In the second half, Brody kind of takes a back seat. Brody is not a sailor. He doesn't like the water. He doesn't feel comfortable on a boat. He is literally, excuse the pun, out of his depth. The real conflict in the second half, apart from the shark, obviously, becomes between Quint and Hooper.
Well, it proves one thing, Mr. Hooper. It proves that you wealthy college boys don't have the education enough to admit when you're wrong.
Both seafaring men, both people who understand what it's like to be on a boat and how to operate there, but both coming from very different angles at that. Quint being the old man in the sea type, that's why he's singing sea shanties all the time.
Farewell and adieu to you fair Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu, you ladies of Spain.
And Hooper, the technological environmentalist.
No, it's a closed-circuit TV system. I have underwater cameras fore and aft.
Who pays for all this stuff? Government? The Institute? This stuff costs a lot of money.
Well, I pay for this mostly myself, actually.
But he does understand how to tie a knot.
Just tie me a sheep shank.
I haven't had to pass basic seamanship in a long time.
And he does understand how things work there. Quint trusts him enough to drive the boat after all. Even though when he's compelled to bring Hooper along, he says,
"Take him for ballast, Chief."
So the real conflict in the second half becomes between these two guys.
We'll have to take this abuse much longer.
And the real character who has an arc in the second half is not Brody. It's actually Quint. And to a lesser extent, Hooper. Quint we see from his first introductory scene, and when we first meet him properly, at the beginning of the second half, he's a hunter. He has no respect for these sharks as intelligent creatures. And they make a point of showing how he's preparing the next trophy. By the end of the film, and before his unfortunate demise, Quint gets a new respect for sharks, especially for this shark. In fact, this is not unlike the scene from Jurassic Park, where the Bob Peck character is confronted by the raptors and suddenly realizes the level of their intelligence.
Clever girl.
One of the key moments here for Quint, and for the others, as a bonding exercise, is when they're comparing scars.
You want a drink? Drink to your leg?
I'll drink to your leg.
Okay, so we drink our legs.
And I love how Brody's about to show his appendix operation scar, but thinks better of it. But then that leads into Quint's story about the Indianapolis.
Oh, then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red. In spite of all the pounding and the hollering, they all come in, they rip you to pieces.
This justifies why Quint hates sharks so much, and then has a begrudging respect for this beast that they're confronting now.
That's the whole impetus, that's the whole spine of Quint. He's not really just crazy, but he has a case out for these sharks.
Now, we all know the stories about the making of Jaws, how Bruce the shark didn't work most of the time, how their 2-month shoot ended up being like 7 or 8 months long.
It's not the time it takes to take the take that takes the time. It's the time it takes between the takes that takes the time that takes to take.
It was the first film really shooting out in the ocean properly, rather than in a tank. But the main thing from my point of view here is, it came from a novel, and Peter Benchley first adapted the novel into a screenplay. But then that was given to another screenwriter, Howard Sackler, who added this story of the Indianapolis, which was not in the book, and is based on a true story, which had only just been publicly released. And that scene of Quint, according to Carl Gottlieb, was largely written by Gottlieb with a bunch of notes from a whole bunch of other writers, but primarily by Robert Shaw himself, the actor, who was, of course, an excellent writer in his own right.
If anybody's responsible for that speech, it's, Howard Sackler, Robert Shaw, and me, who also wrote.
So 1,100 men went in the war. 316 men come out. The Sharks took the rest June the 29th, 1945. Anyway, we delivered the bomb.
And there's other examples where there's a lot of ad-libbing and improvisation.
The thing I remember most is Stephen, obviously, allowing the actors to ad-lib, because a lot of this was ad-lib.
The other great character scene early in the film is when Brody, after a very difficult day, is alone with the sun. Roy Scheider tells the story of how that scene was improvised on the spot.
In between shots, and I was at the, I was like this at the table, and then that little kid was like this. And I went out to the kitchen in the house. I said to Stephen, come here, watch this. And I went through all the motions, and the little guy went copy right after me. He said, okay, and he brought the camera in, and we did that scene.
This is one of the great things about the film, ironically. There is a story, there is a structure here. It comes from the book, after all. But a lot of what's in the film was improvised with the writer, with Carl Gottlieb, with Steven Spielberg, with the actors, made up on the spot or a day or two beforehand. So there's a very natural feel to the whole thing. And this is why structurally, it's not a classic 3-act structure. There are those beats, but it's more of a 2-act structure more than anything else. The first half being what happens at Amity in the town, and the second half being what happens on the boat when they're hunting the shark, just the 3 guys on their own. But then each of those 2 parts have their own mini 3-act structure, with the A story of the shark being the thing that holds it all together.
That's it. Goodbye. I'm not going to waste my time arguing with a man who's lining up to be a hot lunch.
I'd also like to talk a bit about the music. The theme from Jaws obviously is one of the most famous movie themes of all time. And John Williams has said, you only ever hear the theme when there's an actual shark attack. There's at least one sequence in the film where there seems to be a shark attack and everyone panics and comes out of the water, but we do not hear that theme because it's not the real shark. It's kids playing a prank. But apart from that famous theme, I'd like to point out this theme. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be able to play much of this theme, but this is essentially a maritime adventure theme. It's very light-hearted, it's very major key, and it's very uplifting. This is the beginning of the hunt. Quint is in his element. The other guys are kind of excited. And it's making it feel like a real adventure story. This is like Indiana Jones, another John Williams score, of course. And there's a lot of humour in Jaws. One of the most famous lines from the film is, of course,
"You're going to need a bigger boat."
Carl Gottlieb is an interesting choice to be the ultimate screenwriter for this film, because he comes from a comedy background. At the time, he was writing for the TV series The Odd Couple. He'd written mostly for comedy and television, and he knew Steven Spielberg from those days.
You're going to need a bigger boat, right?
But he seems an unusual choice to be writing what is essentially a horror film. But he did bring a level of humanity and humour to the whole thing, which I think is very useful.
We could radio in and get a bigger boat out here.
Hooper also gets a bit of an arc here. He already respects sharks. He already knows all about them, scientifically speaking.
It's a Carcharodon carcharias. It's a great white.
So he knows them on an intellectual level, whereas Quint, again, through his story about the Indianapolis, he knows them and understands them on an emotional level. Quint starts to appreciate them on a more intellectual level. Hooper, when he's in that cage, being attacked by the shark, and is terrified. Now he starts to understand these creatures on an emotional level, which he did not have before. That's his growth arc. For Brody, it's not about understanding sharks at all. It's about being at home in this community that he's chosen to be at home in.
But in Amity, one man can make a difference. In 25 years, there's never been a shooting or a murder in this town.
And therefore, he's got to get used to the water.
Doesn't make much sense for a guy who hates the water to live on an island either.
It's only an island if you look at it from the water.
So that's my take on Jaws. If you like these kinds of story analysis videos, you know what to do. If you have a suggestion for another film you'd like me to look at, put it in the comments. My name is Phil. I'll see you next time.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.